Moi guys! Last week I finished my first sketchbook. In particular, the sketchbook is a Sea White of Brighton in the size A6, and it is a whole media sketchbook with 160 GSM. Inside there are in total 100 pages. I started it a long time ago, actually in 2020, and as I said, I just finished it last week. And this happened because I usually use a single piece of paper to paint on, and I didn't have the habit to use a lot the sketchbook to do my work, but in the last 6 months we can say I use it almost every day, and this is why I was able to finish it, and actually I enjoyed the process so much that I will start immediately another one and I will use it every day. So without further ado, we can start it. We can see that on the cover I have some stickers. Those stickers were actually gave to me in London in the Glossier shop, and then I have also a couple of stickers that actually I don't remember properly where I found. I think in a Easter egg, but I'm not completely sure. When I open the sketchbook, as you can see here, the brand is the Sea White of Brighton, and it is a very cheap brand in UK, and I have to say that the quality of the paper wasn't the best, especially for wet mediums, but I find it very good for color pencils if you don't do so many layers, and also it is quite good for ink, for example, and graphite. In the first page you can see that I put the sentence "I can do it" and the date in which I started this sketchbook, August 2020, and when I finish it. I also write a quote to remember to enjoy the journey. That for me is a mantra in my art journey, because I struggle every single day in my art. So I have always to remember to enjoy the process. And here you can see 2 cups of tea. But actually I completed it on the 28th of July 2022, because for a while I didn't draw anything in the first page. So don't look at the dates because they are all over the place, and they don't reflect actually the drawing chronology. I decided to draw these 2 cups of tea because I love my tea hours in general, and almost every day I have a cup of tea around 3 p.m. and I'm very into the English porcelain kind of cups, so I decided to draw them. Next page, don't ask me why, I decided to paint upside down because I just make a mistake. But this is my first watercolor painting that I ever did. I just got my first set of Winsor & Newton Compton 12 pounds. And as you can see, it was already 2021, so I bought the sketchbook in summer 2020, but actually the second painting was done in 2021, 1 year later. So as I said, I didn't use it so much, especially in the starting point. As first painting with watercolors, I decided to paint animals. One of my favorite subjects. If you follow my channel, you already know that. And as I said, this was my first time using watercolor, and yeah, I think it wasn't very successful. And on the other page there is my second experiment with watercolor, and I think I didn't reach a successful result, but it was a draw from life, and I was in a park in Bromley and it was summer, and I decided to take with me my watercolor palette and try to paint, and this was the final result. I think also it's good to see the struggle, especially in the starting point when you use a new medium, to remember to yourself how far you went in your journey. Here we can find an animal portrait. I don't know if in camera you can see it properly, but this is actually a family dog and she's very cute. And I drew from a photo reference in October 2021. This was done actually last summer on my balcony here in Finland. So as I said, it's a big jump in time, because when I started a sketchbook initially I used to leave a blank page and did my work just in one of the 2 pages to avoid to ruin both works. But then I decided to go back and use every page front and back. So This summer I drew with my Muji pen flowers, just to try them out. Following, in 2022, in January, I drew these with watercolor pencils that I received as a gift for birthday, and I decided to try them out for the first time here. And this was from imagination, thinking about a vacation kind of place, and I sketched it very, very quickly. In the summer 2022, I did this drawing, and I was just arrived here in Finland, and I started to paint from life, and I paint this flower pot that was in the temporary accommodation that I have. It was on my balcony table, and the light was quite perfect, and a morning I decided to paint it. Again, this is a color study from a photo reference on Pinterest about food, and if you follow me on social media, especially, you know how much I love drawing food. I drew sushi and I drew my breakfast. This is a drew from life, and it is a porridge that I made every single morning in my temporary accommodation, and I did both of them using watercolors, always the Winsor & Newton set, because at that time I didn't have any other watercolor. This was a drawing that I did from life, a paint actually, that I did in watercolor, always with Winsor & Newton watercolor, and I just went for a walk near the seaside in exploration, and I sat on a bench and I decided to draw this boat that was at the dock at Haukilahti Pier. Not very successful, and yeah, the green is not the grass but actually the real color of the water that day. This was a drawing from life, from a figure after the Dark Souls character. It wasn't successful at all, especially for the perspective reason and proportions, and I did it with Caran d'Ache watercolor pencils. Now on, you will see a set of drawing from life, from sets that I created at home, with the objects that I found around and some food. And they were done using mixed media. There was watercolor pencils, graphite, and also normal watercolor. And this was the inside scene, and this was actually on the balcony, and as you can see, it's kind of a mess for the graphite that transfers to both pages. And again, draw from life of my kitchen and other objects that I have at home. In this case, I use just graphite, and in this case also watercolor pencils. This was also an attempt to draw one of my dreams, so it's a draw done from imagination, totally, and it wasn't very successful, especially for perspective kind of problems, but I think that the idea wasn't so bad, and I painted it with watercolors and also with Caran d'Ache color pencils. Here we go again with food, and I paint my breakfast from imagination. It is my perfect breakfast with a croissant and cappuccino. Here another draw from imagination, and I drew a cocktail with watercolor and Caran d'Ache watercolor pencils. In this page, as you can see, I started the 100 ads challenge that I'm still doing actually. I didn't respect the 10 days deadline here. In this page, I also try to underline all the ads with the watercolor pencils and then with watercolor to give a continuity kind of effect. And here I tried also to give variety and try to give a background, and yeah, same thing here. When I visited my family in summer 2023, I painted this from life, from my mother's balcony. As you can see here, I keep doing the challenge, but I think this is the last page in this sketchbook about the challenge. And here there is a draw from life that I did during vacation. And this beautiful tree was in front of the mobile home that we rent, and so one day I decided to paint it. This is from imagination, a little bit of architectural practice. I wanted to try to draw with pens again and highlighters. You will see more exploration of these techniques later on. Again, my view on the beach on vacation this summer. This is the Kallio Church here in Helsinki, and I did this work copying a photo reference, and here I try to use ink and highlighters to do shadows. And this was a portrait that I found on Pinterest, and I tried to push a little bit to make it more cartoony kind of feeling, but I think that wasn't very successful, especially for proportion. This was another drawing that I did with the Sakura pen, and I tried to focus on line art. It's something that I don't practice very often. Another drawing from life that I did on my balcony about one of my plants, and this was a very quick 15-20 minutes warm-up sketch. Here a page in which I doodle a little bit, trying out again my Muji pen and all my highlighters. And here also I tried to paint some animals with the brush techniques and highlighters, and also with pens and highlighters. I was working a lot on the technique, and in particular you can see the fish that I did and the duck, and I really love how this page turned out. Actually, unfortunately, as you can see, the brush markers blitz through the pages, so this is not an ideal sketchbook to use the markers, but that is quite logical because the weight of the pages is not very high. Here I painted using the same technique again. I felt in love with that technique, so you will see a lot of sketches done with highlighters and ink. I also recorded 2 videos about these 2 fishes and also the little ice sticks. In this page there is a candy and another animal drawing. Here I tried the brush pen that I bought in Japan, and actually I just came back from my trip, so I painted a pagoda because I was really into Japanese landscape, Japanese architecture, and as you can see from now on I put some kitchen paper to try to avoid any mess between paintings and drawings. Next page, first time using Kuretake Gansai Tambi colors that I also got in Japan, and I really didn't like them on this kind of paper. A little experiment using multicolor pens, and again using brush pen here. An evening that I didn't know what to draw, so I took one of my favorite art books and I started to sketch following some amazing character designs that I found on that. This was done with watercolor Caran-d'Ache pencils because I wanted to try a new technique, but I think it wasn't very good. I didn't like it at all. I tried to stylize a little bit, to make it a little bit cartoony, but I didn't really like the result. On this page I tried for the first time the Holbein gouache that I also bought in Japan, and I really enjoyed using them on this paper. Not a fan of human figure drawing, but sometimes it's necessary to try to practice some poses, and I tried to practice this complicated kind of pose, and I think it was a sculpture that I found on Pinterest, so I tried to copy it, and then I decided to color it with watercolor pencils and put some highlight with white using Sakura pen. Next page we have a drawing from imagination using the gouache that were left on the palette, so it was pretty limited palette. And some other food drawing from a reference photo. Also here I used the gouache, and I also tried to use this beautiful gold watercolor from Kuretake Gansai Tambi drawing a Japanese Daruma. I tried the Holbein watercolor to paint a Japanese temple in this page. It was a very quick sketch. Again, using the gouache, as I said, I really like them on this paper, so I keep painting with them on the sketchbook, and I did these 2 cupcakes. Here I try to paint food, but with Holbein watercolor. It was first time actually using the palette that I set up myself with this watercolor. Here was a try to paint clouds, and it's something that I don't paint very often, so I decided to give it a try, and I didn't like the first result, but I quite like the second one, especially how the lights turn out in the clouds here on this page. Next page there are some animals, and I was still using the watercolor palette that I set up by myself because I wanted to explore it and see if the color choice was good for me and how it works. This is a drawing that I did with Polychromos color pencils that I received as a gift for Christmas, so this was done at the end of the year. On this other page is another one done with the same technique. I think that I use also in some little spot the Prismacolor pencils. Here you can see flowers that I did from a photo reference using still the watercolor palette that I set up myself, and again another drawing done with color pencils this time, and I really love the result. It seems pretty realistic to me. This was a mess actually. I want to draw some musical instrument because it's a subject that I never tackled before, but I really didn't like the technique that I used, and I tried to use ink plus watercolor pencils and some white in here, but I don't like the final result. Next page, this is a portrait that I did with watercolor pencils, in this case the Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencils that were in the companion that I received for Christmas. This page was dedicated entirely to Japan because, as I said, the trip that I did was so amazing that sometimes when I think about it, I feel very inspired, so I just decided to paint this and make a line art of Totoro, one of my favorite Ghibli cartoons. Keep experimenting with gouache. I did these 2 illustrations, 2 landscape from photo reference, and I like how they turn out. I like the vibrancy and the saturation of the colors actually, so I think that I will do more of this in my new sketchbook for sure. And one evening I just wanted to draw a salty breakfast, the one that I never have actually, but I decided to paint these images with my watercolor palette. Next 2 pages, when I realized that I never painted the sea before and the water, and I wanted to use my teal color so bad that I decided to do some seaside scene, and in this case from a photo reference of Cornwall, where I went when I was in UK and I felt in love for that place, and here from another photo reference, I used for both of these my Holbein watercolor. Keep experimenting with mediums. I never tried to do some urban sketches from a photo reference, and this is a very famous Venice church, Santa Lucia, and I decided to draw it and do the lines with waterproof ink and then painted with some watercolors. This was done with a new palette that I set up last week. Actually, it was a palette with a quite randomly choice of color that I decided to try with some works to see if the color setup works and how I feel about that. This was the first of a series of painting that I did with that palette, and I also did some seashells to keep learning about the seaside scene. And I used that palette also to do this seaside scene. And spoiler alert, I really love that palette. I decided to end my sketchbook with a portrait. As I said, not my cup of tea, but it is necessary to practice and challenge yourself, even on subjects that are out of your comfort zone. And I used graphite, that was a safe place for me. And I have to say that I love the final result. I love how soft the lines are and also the shading that I did. So more of them will come because I need to practice definitely more. And I have to say that was a good ending of my sketchbook with a little challenge. And that's it, guys. This finished my sketchbook tour. I really hope you enjoyed to see the works that I did in the last couple of years and how many struggles I have, and I hope that this will help also you in your art journey in order to understand that not every works have to be amazing and the sketchbook is fundamental just to practice and grow. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to don't miss any other content. See you next time. Moi moi!